Maria had been cleaning the Wellington mansion for 12 years. Every morning at 6, she'd walk through the servants' entrance, tie her hair back, and begin her routine. Dust the antiques, vacuum the Persian rugs, polish the silverware until it gleamed. She knew every corner of that house better than the family who owned it. The Wellingtons were old money, the kind of wealthy where they didn't talk about being wealthy. Their home sat on 3 acres in the nicest part of town, with tall iron gates and a circular driveway that could fit 10 cars. Inside, everything whispered expensive. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gold frames, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Maria's daughter Carmen was 15 now. Most days after school, she'd come to the mansion and wait in the small room off the kitchen where the staff took breaks. She'd do her homework at the folding table, trying not to bother anyone. The other workers had gotten used to seeing her there, this quiet girl with dark eyes who never asked for anything. But Carmen wasn't just doing homework during those long afternoons. She was listening. The Wellington house was always filled with music. Mrs. Wellington loved hosting musicians, and their youngest daughter took piano lessons twice a week. The grand piano sat in the main salon, a massive black Steinway that cost more than Maria would earn in 5 years. Carmen had fallen in love with that piano the first time she'd heard it played. She was 8 years old then, small enough to hide behind the heavy curtains while a professional pianist practiced for one of Mrs. Wellington's charity events. The music had moved through her like electricity. She'd never heard anything so beautiful in her entire life. After that day, Carmen found excuses to be near the salon whenever someone played. She'd volunteer to dust the room, to water the plants, anything that gave her a reason to be there. She memorized the way the pianist's hands moved, the way their fingers curved over the keys, the way they sat with their backs straight and their feet positioned just so on the pedals. When she was alone in the house, which happened more often than the Wellingtons realized, Carmen would sit at that piano. Her heart would race every time, terrified someone would walk in and catch her, but she couldn't help herself. She'd press the keys gently at first, then with more confidence. She taught herself to read music from library books and free videos online. Her phone was 3 years old with a cracked screen, but it could still load YouTube tutorials if she waited long enough. For 7 years, Carmen had been teaching herself piano in secret. Nobody knew, not even her mother, who would have worried herself sick about Carmen touching something so expensive. The Wellingtons certainly didn't know. To them, Carmen was just the maid's kid. Invisible. Background noise. Things changed one Tuesday in late September. Mrs. Wellington was planning the annual charity gala, the biggest event of the season. 200 guests. Live music. Silent auction. All the important families would be there, along with local politicians and business owners. It was the kind of party that got written up in the society pages. Mrs. Wellington's daughter, Vivian, was home from college for the week. She was 21, blonde, and used to getting whatever she wanted. That afternoon, she and 3 of her friends were lounging in the sunroom, scrolling through their phones and complaining about being bored. Carmen was in the next room, cleaning the windows. She was humming without realizing it. A piece by Chopin she'd been practicing. The melody floated through the open doorway. Vivian's head snapped up. "Is that the maid's kid?" One of her friends giggled. "I think so." "Is she humming classical music?" "That's hilarious," another one said. "Does she think she's cultured or something?" Vivian got a look on her face. The kind of look that meant she just had an idea and it probably wasn't a nice one. "You know what would be funny? What if we invited her to perform at the gala?" Her friends stared at her. Then they started laughing. "Oh my God, that's perfect," one of them said. "Can you imagine? The maid's daughter trying to play piano in front of everyone? It would be so cringe," another added. "I'm dying just thinking about it." Vivian was already pulling out her phone. "I'm texting my mom right now. We'll say it's for charity, giving opportunities to underprivileged youth or whatever. She'll love that angle." The girls dissolved into laughter again. They were already planning how they'd record it, what hashtags they'd use when they posted the videos. It would be the most entertaining part of what was usually a boring evening of networking and small talk. Mrs. Wellington, distracted by caterers and florists and seating charts, barely read her daughter's text. A performance by a local young person? Sure, why not? It fit the charity theme. She told her assistant to add it to the program. The next day, Maria was polishing the dining room table when Mrs. Wellington walked in with an envelope. "Maria, "This is for your daughter," she said, barely pausing on her way to the next room. Maria opened it with confused hands. It was an invitation. Carmen Santos was requested to perform at the Wellington Charity Gala. Piano performance. Formal attire requested. Her stomach dropped. This had to be a mistake. Carmen didn't play piano. At least Maria didn't think she did. How would the Wellingtons even know Carmen existed, let alone think she could perform? That evening, when Maria showed Carmen the invitation, her daughter's reaction surprised her. Carmen's whole face changed. Her eyes went wide, then filled with something Maria couldn't quite name. Not excitement exactly. Something deeper, fiercer. "I want to do it," Carmen said quietly. "Baby, I don't understand. Do you play piano? When did you learn?" Carmen looked down at her hands. "I've been teaching myself, Mama, for a long time. When you're working and the house is empty, I practice on their piano. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have, but I just..." Her voice trailed off. Maria felt like the floor had shifted under her feet. 7 years. Her daughter had kept this secret for 7 years. She didn't know whether to be angry or amazed. Mostly she felt afraid. "Carmen, these people, they're not kind. You know how they are. Why would they suddenly invite you to perform? This feels wrong." "I know what this is, Mama," Carmen said. She wasn't naive. She'd seen how Vivian and her friends looked at people like her and her mother. Like they were furniture, useful but not quite human. "They think I'm going to embarrass myself. They think it's going to be funny." "Then why would you do it?" Carmen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Because I'm good, Mama. I'm really good. And I've been invisible my whole life. Maybe it's time they actually see me." Maria looked at her daughter, really looked at her. When had this quiet girl become so determined? When had she developed this steel in her spine? "Please, Mama," Carmen said. "Let me do this." Against every instinct screaming at her to protect her child, Maria slowly nodded. She thought about the piano she'd dusted 1,000 times, never imagining her daughter's hands on those keys. She thought about all the hours Carmen had spent in that break room, and now she wondered what her daughter had really been doing all that time. "Okay," Maria whispered. "Okay." Carmen threw her arms around her mother. Over her daughter's shoulder, Maria stared at the invitation on their kitchen table. 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks. She just hoped she wasn't making a terrible mistake. The next 3 weeks felt like living in 2 different worlds at once. During the day, everything looked normal. Maria cleaned the mansion like always. Carmen went to school, then came to wait in the staff room like she'd done for years. But underneath, everything had changed. Carmen had a plan. She'd been preparing for years without even knowing it, teaching herself in stolen moments. But now she had a deadline and the stakes were real. She needed to choose the right piece, something that would prove she wasn't a joke. She spent hours researching on her old phone, reading about the most technically difficult piano pieces ever written. She watched famous pianists perform them, studying their techniques frame by frame. Finally, she made her choice. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the hardest pieces in classical music. Most professional pianists trained for years before attempting it. Her mother thought she was crazy. "Carmen, why not pick something easier? Something pretty and simple." But Carmen shook her head. "If I play something easy, they'll just think I'm okay. I need to play something impossible. I need them to know this isn't luck." Every day after school, Carmen would wait until the house was quiet. The Wellingtons usually left around 3 for various appointments and social commitments. That's when she'd slip into the salon and practice. Her fingers would fly over the keys, playing the same passages over and over until they were perfect. The piece was brutal. Her hands ached. Sometimes her fingers cramped so badly she had to stop and stretch them out. Tears of frustration in her eyes. There were sections she could play in her sleep and others that still tripped her up no matter how many times she tried. Maria would stand outside the salon door, keeping watch. She'd never heard her daughter play before, not really. The music that poured out of that room made her chest tight. It was angry and beautiful and sad all at once. She couldn't believe these sounds were coming from her baby girl's hands. But Maria was also terrified. She knew the Wellington household better than anyone. She'd seen how they operated. And lately, she'd been noticing things that made her stomach turn. Vivian and her friends kept showing up at the house, which was unusual. They'd sit in the sunroom with their phones, whispering and giggling. Once Maria walked by and heard one of them say, "Wait until you see this," before they all burst out laughing. They didn't know Maria spoke perfect English, even though she sometimes pretended not to when it was convenient. She also noticed Vivian being unusually nice to Carmen. One day she actually spoke to her directly. "So excited for your performance," Vivian had said with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's going to be absolutely unforgettable." Maria wanted to pull her daughter out of this whole thing. Every motherly instinct screamed at her that this was a trap. But when she looked at Carmen's face as she practiced, saw the fierce concentration there, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Carmen wasn't just practicing piano. She was working double shifts at the diner where she had a part-time job. She was saving every penny, though she wouldn't tell her mother why at first. Maria found out when she saw Carmen looking at dresses online, affordable ones from discount stores. "Mama, the invitation said formal attire," Carmen explained. "I need something appropriate." They went shopping together on Carmen's day off. The stores in their neighborhood didn't carry fancy dresses, so they took 2 buses to a discount mall across town. They spent 2 hours going through racks looking for something that would work. Most of the formal dresses were either too expensive or looked cheap in a way that would stand out in the Wellington mansion. Carmen tried on dress after dress, and Maria watched her daughter's face fall a little more each time. "Maybe I can borrow something," Carmen said quietly. But they both knew she didn't have friends who owned gala-appropriate dresses. They went home empty-handed. Maria lay awake that night, doing math in her head. She had some savings, but it was for emergencies. Was this an emergency? She wasn't sure anymore. 2 days later, a package arrived at their apartment. It was addressed to Carmen in handwriting Maria didn't recognize at first. Inside was a dress. Not brand new, but beautiful. Deep midnight blue, simple and elegant. The kind of dress that wouldn't look out of place at a fancy event, but wouldn't scream trying too hard either. There was a note tucked inside, written on expensive cream-colored paper. "For your performance, you deserve to shine. E.W." Maria's hands trembled as she held the note. E.W. Elizabeth Wellington. The old Mrs. Wellington, the grandmother who lived in the east wing of the mansion. Maria had cared for her 3 years ago when she'd been sick with pneumonia. The family had been ready to send her to a nursing home, but Maria had insisted on nursing her back to health, spending extra hours to make sure she was comfortable. The old woman had never forgotten. She was the only Wellington who looked Maria in the eye when she spoke to her, who asked about Carmen, who treated the staff like human beings. Carmen tried on the dress. It fit perfectly. Maria braided her daughter's thick dark hair and stepped back to look at her. For a moment, she could almost imagine Carmen belonged in that world of crystal chandeliers and expensive wine. But reality crashed back quickly. At the mansion, the preparations for the gala were in full swing. Maria heard Mrs. Wellington on the phone, describing the event to friends. "Yes, we're having quite an interesting musical performance this year. Very unique. Supporting local youth talent and all that." The way she said unique made Maria's jaw tighten. The hardest part was watching Carmen push herself to the breaking point. One afternoon, Maria found her daughter slumped over the piano keys, shoulders shaking. She'd been practicing for 4 hours straight and still couldn't get one particular section right. "Baby, take a break," Maria said softly, placing a hand on Carmen's shoulder. "I can't, Mama. It's not good enough yet. It has to be perfect." "Why does it have to be perfect? Why does it matter so much what these people think?" Carmen lifted her head. Her eyes were red, but there was fire in them. "Because I've spent my whole life in this house being invisible, walking past them in hallways while they talk like I'm not there, hearing them laugh about people like us. Just once I want them to see me, really see me. Not as your daughter, not as the poor kid, just as someone who can do something extraordinary." Maria understood then. This wasn't about the piano. It was about dignity, about being seen as a full human being instead of part of the scenery. The week before the gala, something shifted in Carmen's playing. She stopped fighting the piece and started feeling it. The music became less about technical perfection and more about emotion. When she played, Maria could hear her daughter's whole life in those notes. the loneliness, the determination, the hope. 3 days before the event, Carmen practiced her piece one final time from beginning to end. When she finished, she sat still for a long moment, then turned to look at her mother. "I'm ready," she said. Maria nodded, even though her heart was pounding. "I know you are." That night, Maria pressed Carmen's blue dress and hung it carefully in their tiny closet. She polished Carmen's one pair of decent shoes. She tried not to think about what might go wrong. Carmen couldn't sleep. She lay in bed going over the piece in her head, her fingers moving slightly against the blanket as if playing invisible keys. In 2 days, everything would change. One way or another, after that performance, life would never be the same. She wasn't scared anymore. She'd done the work. Whatever happened next, at least she'd know she gave it everything she had. At least, she wouldn't spend the rest of her life wondering what if. The morning of the gala arrived with bright sunshine. Maria got up extra early for her shift. Carmen was already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table, staring at her hands. "Today's the day," Maria said. Carmen looked up at her mother and smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a fake smile. It was genuine. "Today's the day," she agreed. Neither of them knew it yet, but Maria was right about one thing. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. The Wellington mansion looked like something out of a magazine that evening. Every window blazed with warm light. White-gloved valets parked luxury cars in neat rows along the circular driveway. Women in designer gowns and men in expensive tuxedos streamed through the front entrance, their jewelry catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Maria had been working since dawn. She'd helped set up chairs in the main salon, arranged flowers, and made sure every glass sparkled. Now she stood in the corner of the grand hall wearing her server's uniform, a black dress with a white apron. Her job was to circulate with trays of champagne and make herself invisible. But tonight, being invisible felt impossible. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Carmen was somewhere in the small prep room off the kitchen, waiting for her turn to perform. Maria hadn't seen her daughter in 2 hours. She wanted to run back there, to hold her hand, to tell her they could still leave. But she stayed at her post, gripping her serving tray like a lifeline. The guests were exactly what she expected. They air-kissed each other's cheeks and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. They talked about their vacation homes and their children's prestigious colleges. They dropped names of people Maria had only seen on television. This was their world, and they wore it comfortably. Vivian held court near the piano with her group of friends. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, phones ready, whispering and giggling behind their hands. Maria watched them and felt her jaw tighten. She knew what they were waiting for. At 8 o'clock, Mr. Wellington stepped up to the microphone. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about anything. He welcomed everyone, thanked them for their generous donations, and talked about the importance of supporting the arts. "And speaking of the arts," he continued, "we have a very special performance this evening. A young local talent will be playing for us tonight. Please welcome Carmen Santos." The applause was polite but thin. Most people were still chatting, barely paying attention. Maria saw several guests lean toward each other, confused looks on their faces. Carmen who? A few were already reaching for their phones, bored. Then Carmen walked in. She moved through the crowd toward the piano, and Maria's breath caught in her throat. Her daughter looked beautiful. The midnight blue dress fit her perfectly. She'd braided her hair in a crown around her head. She held her head high, her back straight. She looked like she belonged there, even though both of them knew she didn't. But Maria could see what others might miss. The slight tremble in Carmen's hands, the way she swallowed hard before sitting down at the piano bench. Her daughter was terrified. She was also the bravest person Maria had ever known. The room didn't quiet down when Carmen sat at the piano. People kept talking. Someone laughed loudly near the bar. A woman in a red dress complained about the temperature. Carmen was just background entertainment to them, something to glance at between conversations. Vivian's phone was already recording. Her friends were positioned at different angles, making sure they'd capture every moment of what they expected to be a disaster. One of them had her hand over her mouth, already trying not to laugh. Carmen adjusted the bench. She placed her feet on the pedals. She lifted her hands and held them over the keys for just a moment. Maria saw her daughter close her eyes and take a deep breath. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 cut through the room like a knife. It wasn't gentle or timid. It was powerful, demanding. Within 3 seconds, the conversation near Carmen died. Within 10 seconds, half the room had gone silent. Within 20 seconds, everyone had stopped what they were doing. Maria had heard Carmen practice this piece dozens of times. But this was different. This wasn't practice. This was something else entirely. Carmen's hands flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves. It was angry and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. People started moving closer to the piano. They couldn't help themselves. The music pulled them in. A man in the back stood up from his chair to see better. A woman near the front had tears streaming down her face, though she didn't seem to notice. Maria watched her daughter and felt her own tears come. This was what Carmen had been hiding all these years. This gift, this impossible talent playing out on an instrument that cost more than their entire apartment. Her baby girl was pouring her whole heart into this music, and the room could feel it. Vivian's smirk had frozen on her face. Her phone was still recording, but not for the reasons she'd planned. Her friends had lowered their phones, staring at Carmen with open mouths. One of them actually looked ashamed. The piece had sections that were soft and tender, moments that felt like whispers. Then it would explode into passages of such technical difficulty that even trained pianists would struggle. Carmen's fingers never stumbled. She'd memorized every note, practiced every transition 1,000 times. Her hands moved like they were part of the piano itself. An older man near the front was shaking his head slowly, his eyes wide. Maria would learn later that he was Dr. Hoffman, director of the city's most prestigious music conservatory. He'd trained classical pianists for 40 years. He was watching Carmen like he'd just witnessed a miracle. The music built and built, climbing toward the climax. Carmen's whole body moved with it. She was lost in the piece now, completely transported. She wasn't thinking about the crowd or their expectations or their cruelty. She was just playing, giving everything she had to this moment she'd dreamed about for 7 years. When she hit the final crescendo, people gasped. Her hands crashed down on the keys with perfect precision, the sound filling every corner of that enormous room. Then slowly, gently, she played the closing notes, soft and fading like a goodbye. The last note hung in the air. Carmen's hands stilled on the keys. She sat there for a moment, her eyes still closed, breathing hard. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Maria's heart pounded. She wanted to run to her daughter. She wanted to grab her and leave before anything could ruin this moment. Then someone in the back of the room started clapping. Just one person. Then another. Then 3 more. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People were standing, some of them were crying. Everyone was clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. Carmen opened her eyes. She looked stunned, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Slowly, she stood up from the piano bench. She gave a small, awkward bow. The applause got louder. People surged forward. A crowd formed around the piano. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to shake her hand, to tell her how incredible she was. Maria tried to push through, but there were too many people. Dr. Hoffman reached Carmen first. Maria saw him grab her daughter's hand, saying something urgent. Other people crowded in. A woman in diamonds. A man with an expensive watch. All of them talking at once. Vivian and her friends had disappeared into the crowd. Their phones were put away. Their plan had backfired spectacularly, and they knew it. Mrs. Wellington stood near the doorway looking absolutely shocked. Her husband was staring at Carmen like he'd never seen her before. Which in a way he hadn't. None of them had. Maria finally pushed through to her daughter. Carmen saw her and their eyes met across the crowd. In that look, they said everything. We did it, it worked. They saw you. But as Maria reached for Carmen's hand, she felt something shift in the room. This moment of triumph was just the beginning. She could see it in the way these wealthy people were looking at her daughter now. With interest. With hunger. With plans Carmen had wanted to be seen. Well, now everyone was looking. Maria just hoped her daughter was ready for what came next. The next morning, Carmen woke up to find her face on the internet. Someone at the gala had recorded her performance and posted it online. By sunrise, it had been shared thousands of times. By noon, it was everywhere. The video showed her sitting at that massive piano, her hands flying across the keys, the shocked faces of wealthy guests in the background. The caption read, "Hidden genius stuns elite crowd at charity gala." Carmen sat on her bed staring at her cracked phone screen, watching the view count climb. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. The comment section was exploding. Most people were amazed. Some were angry at a society that had overlooked her talent. A few accused her of lying, saying she must have had secret expensive training. Her phone started ringing, numbers she didn't recognize. She let them go to voicemail. Then the text started. Friends from school she barely talked to were suddenly congratulating her. Strangers were finding her social media and sending messages. Someone from a local news station wanted an interview. Maria came into the room holding her own phone, her face pale. "Carmen, there are reporters outside our building. They went to the window and peeked through the curtains." Sure enough, 2 news vans were parked on the street below. A man with a camera stood on the sidewalk talking into his phone. "What do we do?" Carmen asked. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." The Wellington house was in chaos too. Mrs. Wellington kept getting calls from friends asking about that remarkable girl. Mr. Wellington was fielding questions from business associates who wanted to be connected with this inspiring story. Everyone suddenly wanted to be part of Carmen's narrative. Vivian had locked herself in her room. The video of Carmen's performance had made its way to all her friends' group chats. People were calling her out for trying to humiliate someone. Screenshots of her mocking texts from before the performance were being passed around. Her carefully crafted social media image was crumbling. By the second day, the story had grown beyond anything Carmen could have imagined. News outlets were framing it as everything from an inspirational underdog tale to a critique of class inequality. Think pieces appeared online with titles like "The Talent We Miss When We Don't Look" and "Classical Music's Diversity Problem." Carmen did one interview with a local news channel. They came to her apartment and filmed her in their tiny living room. The reporter asked questions that made her uncomfortable. "What's it like being poor and talented? Do you resent the wealthy families you've been around? How does it feel to prove everyone wrong?" She tried to give honest answers, but they kept pushing her to say things she didn't mean. They wanted her to be angry. They wanted her to play the role of the wronged victim. When the segment aired that evening, they'd edited her words to make her sound more dramatic than she'd been. Maria watched the interview and shook her head. "They're using you, mija. They're making you into a story instead of a person." But not everything was bad. On the third day, Dr. Hoffman called. The old music director had gotten Carmen's number from the Wellingtons. His voice on the phone was warm and genuine. "Carmen, I've been teaching piano for 42 years. What you did the other night I've only seen a handful of times in my entire career. You have something special, something real." He offered her a full scholarship to the conservatory. Not just tuition, but housing, a meal plan, a stipend for expenses. Everything she'd need. Carmen held the phone with shaking hands and tried not to cry. "I need to think about it," she managed to say. "Can I call you back?" "Of course. Take your time. But Carmen, don't let this gift go to waste. The world needs to hear you play." After she hung up, Carmen sat with her mother at their kitchen table. They had a real decision to make now. This wasn't just about one performance anymore. This was about Carmen's entire future. "It's everything you've wanted," Maria said quietly. "Why do you look so scared?" "Because I don't know if they want me or if they want the story," Carmen admitted. The poor girl who made it. The maid's daughter who surprised everyone. What happens when they get bored of that story? What if I'm not good enough once the novelty wears off? Maria reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. "You were good enough before anyone was watching. You were good enough when you were teaching yourself in an empty room. That hasn't changed. More offers came in. A wealthy businessman called offering to fund her education at any school she wanted. A famous pianist reached out on social media offering private lessons. A recording studio expressed interest in documenting her journey. Everyone wanted a piece of her story. But there were ugly sides too. Online comments started appearing from people who didn't believe she was self-taught. They said it was impossible to reach that level without formal training. Some accused her of lying for attention. Others said she was being used by liberals pushing an agenda. The internet had opinions about everything. At school, things got weird. Kids who'd never spoken to her suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers who'd barely noticed her before were now overly encouraging. Everyone treated her differently, and she hated it. She was still the same person she'd been a week ago, but nobody seemed to see that. The worst part was the Wellingtons. Mrs. Wellington kept calling Maria, asking to set up meetings with Carmen. She wanted to help, she said. She wanted to be involved in Carmen's future. She talked about how the family had always supported the arts, always believed in giving opportunities to talented young people. Maria listened to these calls with a tight jaw. Where was this support when Carmen was dusting their piano for years? Where was this belief in opportunity when she was just the invisible maid's kid? One afternoon, old Mrs. Wellington, the grandmother, asked to speak with Carmen privately. They sat in the sunroom where Vivian had first gotten the idea to mock her. The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. "I know what they did," she said quietly. "My granddaughter and her friends. I know they invited you as a joke." Carmen didn't know what to say. She just nodded. "I'm ashamed," the old woman continued. "Ashamed of how my family treats people. Your mother took care of me when I was sick. She sat with me at night when I was scared. She treated me with more kindness than my own children did, and we've treated you both like you're invisible." She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This isn't charity. It's not guilt money. It's what I should have done years ago." Inside was a check, enough to cover Carmen's expenses for the first year of school, no matter where she went. Carmen tried to refuse it, but the old woman pressed it into her hands. "Take it, not because you need it, but because it's right. And Carmen, whatever you decide to do, make sure you're doing it for yourself. Not for them, not for the story. For you." That night, Carmen and Maria talked for hours. They spread all the offers out on their kitchen table. The conservatory, the private lessons, the recording contract, the scholarship money. It was overwhelming. "What do you want, baby?" Maria asked. "Forget what everyone else wants. What do you want?" Carmen thought about that piano in the empty mansion, about the years of teaching herself, about the music that had saved her when she felt invisible, about why she'd started playing in the first place. "I want to get better," she said finally. "I want to learn everything I don't know yet. I want to earn this, not just be handed it because I'm a good story." "Then that's what we'll do," Maria said firmly. Carmen called Dr. Hoffman the next morning and accepted his offer, but she had conditions. No special treatment, no media coverage of her time at school. She wanted to be judged on her actual ability, not on her background. She wanted to work twice as hard as everyone else if she had to. Dr. Hoffman agreed immediately. "That's exactly the attitude that will make you great," he said. The video of her performance eventually stopped going viral. The reporters moved on to other stories. The internet found new things to argue about. Carmen's 15 minutes of fame faded, which was exactly what she wanted, but the work was just beginning. In 2 months, she'd start at the conservatory. She'd be surrounded by students who'd had private lessons since they were 5, who'd attended prestigious music camps, who'd never had to teach themselves anything because they'd always had the best teachers. Carmen knew it would be hard. She knew some of them would resent her. She knew she'd have to prove herself every single day, but she also knew something they didn't. She knew what it was like to want something so badly you'd teach yourself in secret for 7 years. She knew how to work when nobody was watching. The night before she left for school, Carmen went back to the Wellington mansion one last time. Maria had to work late and Carmen had permission to practice. She sat at that piano in that empty salon and played for herself. Not for an audience, not for a video, just for the pure love of music. Her hands moved over the keys and she smiled. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The first semester at the conservatory nearly broke Carmen. She moved into the dorms in late August with 2 suitcases and her mother's worried face burned into her memory. Her roommate was a girl from Connecticut whose parents had bought her a grand piano for her 6th birthday. Down the hall lived a boy who'd performed at Carnegie Hall when he was 12. Everyone had a story. Everyone had credentials. Carmen had a viral video and 7 years of secret practice. The classes were brutal. Music theory made her head spin. She was behind on terminology, on reading complex scores. on understanding the technical language other students threw around casually. They'd been trained in this vocabulary since childhood. Carmen was learning it for the first time at 15. Her piano instructor, Professor Chen, was a small woman with sharp eyes and even sharper criticism. During Carmen's first lesson, she played through a piece she thought was pretty good. When she finished, Professor Chen was silent for a long moment. "You have raw talent," she said finally. "But technique? Proper form? Understanding of the composer's intent? We have a lot of work to do." Carmen practiced 6 hours a day, then 8, then 10. Her fingers developed calluses on top of calluses. She fell asleep with music notation swimming behind her eyelids. While other students went to parties or grabbed dinner together, Carmen was in a practice room, playing the same passage over and over until her hands cramped. Some students were kind. They helped her catch up, shared their notes, invited her to study groups. Others weren't. She'd hear whispers in the hallways. "That's the viral girl. I heard she can't even read music properly. She only got in because of that video." One afternoon, she walked past a practice room and heard 2 students talking. "She doesn't belong here," one said. "This isn't a charity program. She's taking a spot from someone who actually trained for this." Carmen kept walking, her face burning. That night, she called her mother, crying. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." "Baby, you earned your place," Maria said firmly. "Not because of that video, because you're willing to work harder than anyone else. Keep going." So she did. By November, something shifted. Professor Chen stopped her mid-piece during a lesson and actually smiled. "Better, much better. You're starting to understand." Carmen wasn't just learning technique anymore. She was learning why the technique mattered. How a slight change in finger position could alter the emotion of a note. How understanding what the composer was feeling when they wrote the piece could transform the entire performance. Her playing evolved. It kept the raw emotion that had stunned people at the gala, but now it had structure, control, purpose. She was becoming not just talented, but skilled. In December, the conservatory held its winter recital. All first-year students had to perform. Carmen chose a Chopin nocturne, something beautiful but technically demanding. She practiced until she could play it in her sleep. The night of the recital, Maria took off work and rode 2 buses to get there. She sat in the audience wearing her nicest dress, surrounded by parents in expensive clothes who barely glanced her way. But when Carmen walked onto that stage, Maria sat up straighter. Her daughter had changed. She carried herself differently now. More confident. More certain. Carmen played and the audience was silent. Not the shocked silence of the gala, but the appreciative silence of people who understood what they were hearing. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Not viral video famous, but respectfully impressed. After the recital, Professor Chen found Carmen. "You've come far," she said. "Farther than I expected in just 1 semester. You're not the same pianist who walked into my studio in August." Carmen smiled. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact. Keep working." The second semester was easier. Not because the work got less demanding, but because Carmen had found her rhythm. She knew how to balance practice with rest. She'd made real friends who liked her for who she was, not for her story. She was just another music student grinding through difficult pieces and stressing about exams. The viral video faded into old internet history. Occasionally someone would recognize her and bring it up, but mostly people moved on. Carmen was grateful. She didn't want to be the viral piano girl anymore. She wanted to be a pianist. In March, Dr. Hoffman called her into his office. "There's a spring showcase next month," he said. "I want you to perform." Carmen's stomach dropped. Public performances still made her nervous. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You are." "And Carmen, this time, I want you to choose a piece that means something to you. Not what you think people want to hear. What speaks to you." She spent a week thinking about it. Finally, she chose a piece by Clara Schumann, a female composer who'd fought for recognition in a male-dominated world. A woman who'd been brilliant but overlooked. Someone whose story Carmen understood. The night of the showcase, Carmen stood backstage and watched the other performers. They were all so polished, so trained, so perfect. For a moment, the old doubts crept back in. What was she doing here? Then she thought about that empty mansion, about dusting a piano she wasn't supposed to touch. about teaching herself because no one else would, about her mother's face in the audience at every performance, about choosing to be seen instead of staying invisible. She walked onto the stage. The audience was smaller than the gala, maybe 50 people. Music students, faculty, a few parents. Maria sat in the third row, her hands folded in her lap. In the back, Carmen was surprised to see old Mrs. Wellington. The grandmother had come. Carmen sat at the piano and took a breath. Then she began to play. This time was different from both the gala and the recital. At the gala, she'd played to prove herself. At the recital, she'd played to show her progress. But tonight, she played for the pure joy of it, for the music itself. The piece was emotional and complex, filled with longing and strength. Carmen poured herself into it, no longer thinking about technique or judgment, just feeling the music and letting it flow through her fingers. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment before standing. The applause was sincere and appreciative. Not thunderous like the gala, but better somehow, more real. Professor Chen caught her afterward. That, she said simply, was art. 3 years passed. Carmen graduated from the conservatory with honors. Not the top of her class, but solid, respected. She'd earned every bit of it through countless hours of practice and determination. She got offers to perform professionally, but she surprised everyone by turning most of them down. Instead, she took a position teaching piano at a community center in a low-income neighborhood. The pay wasn't great, but that wasn't the point. Her students were kids who'd never had lessons before, kids who couldn't afford private teachers or fancy music schools, kids who reminded her of herself at 8 years old, hearing piano music for the first time and feeling something wake up inside. She taught them properly, the way she'd eventually been taught. But she also taught them what she'd learned on her own. That talent without work meant nothing. That being overlooked didn't mean being worthless. That sometimes the greatest gift was being seen. Maria retired from cleaning houses. Carmen's teaching salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to help her mother finally rest. They moved to a small apartment with slightly better heating and walls that didn't have cracks. On weekends, Carmen performed at small venues, coffee shops, community theaters, library events. Nothing viral or famous, just honest performances for people who appreciated music. Sometimes she played the pieces that had made her famous. More often, she played things nobody had heard before. One Saturday afternoon, a shy girl about 12 years old approached her after a library performance. "That was beautiful," the girl said quietly. "I wish I could play like that." "Do you have a piano?" Carmen asked. The girl shook her head. "We can't afford one." Carmen smiled. She pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down the address of the community center. "Come here on Tuesday evenings. I teach free classes. Everyone's welcome." The girl's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really. I learned on a piano that wasn't mine. Someone gave me a chance, now I'm giving you one." The girl clutched the paper like it was gold and ran back to her mother, excited and chattering. Maria had watched the whole exchange. She walked over and hugged her daughter. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I learned from the best, Mama." 5 years after the viral video, Carmen was invited back to the conservatory to give a master class. She stood in front of a room full of talented students and shared her story. Not the internet version, but the real one. The lonely one. The difficult one. The one about falling in love with music and refusing to let go. "Talent matters," she told them. "But it's not enough. You need discipline. You need humility. You need to remember why you started playing in the first place." After the class, a student approached her. "I saw your video years ago," he said. "It inspired me to audition here. I was scared I wasn't good enough, but you made me want to try." Carmen felt her throat tighten. This was why she'd played at that gala. Not for fame or validation, but for moments like this, for the chance to inspire someone else who felt invisible. That night, she went to a piano store. After years of saving, she finally bought her own instrument. Nothing fancy, but solid and well-made. It was delivered to her apartment the following week. She sat down at her own piano in her own home and played. Not for an audience, not for a video, just for herself and for the 8-year-old girl who'd first heard music and thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Maria listened from the kitchen, tears running down her face. They'd come so far from that mansion, from those days of being invisible. They'd built something real, something lasting. Carmen's hands moved over the keys and she smiled. She'd found her voice, and it was exactly what she'd always wanted it to be. Honest, hard-earned, and entirely her own.